All right. You might recall a few weeks ago when I was filling in for Alan on breakfast, I spoke to a man by the name of Dr. Howard Brady. He's a scientist. He's just written a book titled Mirrors and Mazes, a guide through the climate change debate. And he had such a positive response after the interview, with so much interest shown online too, I thought I'd invite him back into the studio here to take your calls and to flesh out some more in this debate on climate change, because as our good friend Rowan Dean said to us on Monday, our deplorable, we are in the middle of a climate change war. And he's talking about the debate that climate change has become in this country. So if you have a climate question for the doctor, you can call in on 131873. I also want to follow up from that previous interview with him by taking a closer look at rising sea levels. Apparently there's some kind of scandal developing regarding the equipment used to assess the acceleration of rising sea levels. And he's done his research on that, Dr. Howard Brady, and he joins me in the studio right now. Thank you very much for coming in.
Good afternoon, Chris. Yeah, the sea level debate's a mess. Tide gauges have always shown sea level going up at a very steady rate, like in up a ramp. But a satellite was put up to start measuring sea level in 92, and there's been a series of these. And wow, they've suddenly showed sea level accelerating. But then in, I think it was 2011, the US Army Corps of Engineers said there's problems with the altimetry systems in this satellite. It's not accurate enough to measure acceleration of sea level, and it's a scam. It's wrong. And then the next year, the satellite engineers, the ones who designed the satellite, put a proposal to Congress for a new system called GRASP, but they can't get the money. So the satellite's being managed by the University of Colorado, but no mention of the fact that the sea level is not accelerating, sea level's still going up at a steady rate. So over Sydney, the satellite is out over 300%. Fort Denison's never been over 8 centimetres a century. The satellite says near 30 centimetres.
Does it really?
Yeah, and over the German coast, it's out 200%.
And you have no faith in any of the measurements that are done on sea levels in the world?
Not from the satellite. But the tide gauges going back 160 years. They've been analysed by the US Army Corps of Engineers. And lately, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration of the US analysed 200 tide gauges.
Yep.
East and west coast of the United States, 6 islands in the Atlantic, 6 in the Pacific, still no acceleration of sea level.
It's interesting. I got together with a group of South Coast oyster farmers last year, and I said to them, listen, your father ran the same leases you have now, and his father ran those leases, right? You said, yep, I've had 150 years looking after the leases along my plot of the South Coast. And I said, have you seen an increase in sea levels? He said, we have the leases on exactly the same level as they were when my grandfather ran the leases. Nothing's changed. We have our tides, we have our high tides, we have our low tides, we have our king tides. And we've found no discernible increase in sea levels along the South
Chris,
Coast.
that is fascinating, because that's where I started when I heard a bad report given by engineers about the South Coast around Nowra.
Yeah.
And what I did was I got aerial photographs from 1948. I superimposed them with aerial photographs from 2008. There was no change. As a matter of fact, some beaches had grown seaweed. And the reason for that was maybe because of extra CO2. There was more vegetation in the foredune, and all that vegetation is a sand trap. So in other words, some beaches had advanced 8 metres seaward when the greenies were saying that the coast was retreating, and others were stable.
Okay, let's go back a little bit. You said to me about 3 minutes ago that we don't have accelerating sea levels, but we have a steady rise in sea levels. Why do we have a steady rise in sea levels?
There are 2 reasons for that. First of all, because we are warming, there is climate change.
Yeah.
There's some expansion of seawater, and that gives us a rise all around the oceans around the world. And secondly...
So how much over the last 100 years has the sea level in Sydney Harbour increased, according to Fort Denison measurements?
Around 8 centimetres 100 years.
8 centimetres in 100 years.
Which you'd hardly see.
Right, 8 centimetres.
That's right. Now, the second reason there's a rise in sea level, there's some retreat of glaciers around the world, especially in the mid-latitudes, and there's some retreat in Greenland. Antarctica's stable, despite all the scary stuff. There's extra snowfall in West Antarctica, which is compensating for loss from, ice shelves and all that type of stuff.
Okay, all right, that's interesting. I want to take a break, and if you've got a question for Dr. Howard Brady, who's put the book out, Mirrors and Mazes, A Guide Through the Climate Change Debate, go for your life, 131 873. This is Chris Smith across Australia. I've got Dr. Howard Brady with me in the studio. Mirrors and Mazes, A Guide Through the Climate Change Debate. I want to ask you two quick questions before we go to callers. If you're in Antarctica today, for that snow and that ice to melt, it would have to reach above 0 degrees, am I right?
Oh, absolutely. And
Okay.
at the pole, it's minus 55 on a summer's day.
So it's minus 55 in terms of the climate there, and what's the ice registered in terms of...
Oh, the ice will be at least minus 30 degrees Celsius. As you drill down, it may get a bit warmer to the base, but it's still negative, and the idea of that melting quickly is just ridiculous.
All right, how much melting would have to occur for our sea levels to rise by 1 metre?
Well, I think the best way to do that, Chris, is to describe an iceberg, because when there's an iceberg out at sea, some prophet will get up and say, look what that's going to do to sea level. Yeah. But if you need to raise sea level a metre, you need an iceberg that's 3,000 k's across, that's across Australia, 100 k's wide and 1 k deep. That'll give you a metre.
3,000 k's wide?
Long and 100 k's wide. Yeah. That's
to get a metre of sea level rise.
That's right. And someone sees this huge, the largest iceberg we've ever seen, and you just look at it as an Antarctic scientist and you laugh.
Yeah. Okay. Basima, you've got a question for Howard. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask the doctor, is there any factual evidence, objective evidence that correlates human activity, emissions, whatever, with climate change, that it's caused by climate change and it's not a natural phenomenon?
Basima, that's a very good question. First of all, around cities, yes, man is causing local climate change. We're getting a black body effect in the concrete and all that. But if you look at the whole world, not really at all. We're causing pollution.
What percentage of the CO2 emitted is responsible from man?
Well, the amount of CO2 in the air is 0.04%, but first I'd like to go back, Chris. The main greenhouse gas is water vapour, which is over 90% of the greenhouse effect. So CO2's only 8 to 10% of that, and then within that there's a little bit that we put in. So we're doing...
When you say a little bit, what's a little bit?
Oh, gosh, maybe 50 gigatons a year or something. It's peanuts.
Peanuts.
But
compared to, for instance, if Mount Pinatubo went off and shattered overnight.
No, we're putting in more than those. But that's not the main point. Is that the amount that we're putting in is causing CO2 to rise, but its effect in terms of absorbing heat coming back from the earth, each time you increase the amount of CO2, it just gets less. It's already absorbed what it can.
Okay. Neil, go right ahead.
Oh, g'day. Look, many times I've heard these discussions about sea level rises. I've never yet heard anyone discuss what level of sea rise is contributed to the soil erosion all around the world, especially coming out of the Amazon. You can see how far in the ocean it goes. What level is contributed to erosion going into the ocean every year? Unlike, of course, ice that melts, goes into the ocean, and then it gets evaporated and falls again as snow and rain and turns back into ice again as a cycle. Once soil goes into the ocean, it never comes out. There's no drain flow.
Neil, I can't really answer that question. In some places, like in the Bay of Bengal, all the sediment coming down the Ganges is causing the seafloor off there to rise, and so it's shallowing the sea there, and that would be affecting sea level to some extent. But remember, the ocean is 68% of the Earth. Our land is only 32%. So I don't think all of that erosion going into the sea, which you correctly point to, is causing any significant change in sea level.
What about changes to tectonic plates from earthquakes, etc.?
That will only cause local changes. It's not going to change the sea level all around the world at all.
Right, okay. Colin, go right ahead.
Oh, good afternoon, Chris and Doctor.
Hi.
Look, I'm just wondering, because for the last few years there's been extremely cold winters in the Northern Hemisphere and worse than normal summers as well. And it seems to me that would actually be consistent with an increase in the angle of the Earth's axis. Are you aware if any measurement has been done, and if so, would that contribute to climate change?
The Earth's axis does sort of rotate, but on a much longer scale.
Yeah.
What's been happening the last few years, the jet stream has been more convoluted, and that causes more mixing of cold air and warm air. So while you get some of these cold phases, say, in the eastern coast of the United States, you'll get some warm period in Alaska. So we're seeing a more convoluted jet stream, but to say that that's a long-term event or something, I don't think that's true at all. I think we've got to live with all those variations.
That's just a natural variation.
Yes, I think so. And the Americans keep a graph of the highest winds in the Earth every 6 hours, and they've kept that now for 40 years. There is no trend upwards at all. It's just ups and downs.
Yeah.
And one more thing. The Prime Minister's Award in Australia in 2015 was Professor Graham Farquhar, and he showed that winds on the interior of Australia have been dropping for 30 years. So much for the model saying everything's getting worse.
Okay, Colin, thank you very much for that. Paul's got a question for you. He sent me an email. He says, I've lived on the Central Coast on the waterfront for years with the seawall as my boundary. The levels today are lower than what they were 40 years ago. How can this be possible?
Paul, all I can say is there's no such thing as a uniform sea level policy that any council could have. Every council has to understand its own coast. In some places it could be an excess of sand offshore that's coming in, and that'll cause local variations. And other places, if man particularly changes some estuary, you can get ripping and you can get like erosion at Bar Harbour. So that the coast is very different. And you really have to understand your own unique coastline.
But isn't it true, and I've covered these stories myself, where you've got certain council environmental engineers who take world sea level rise data and apply it to their own local area?
Oh, Chris, that's so true. You talked the other day about these high school teachers out of their depth trying to explain climate to school children.
Yeah.
A lot of the companies, coastal engineering companies, they're the same. They're out of their depth. They just want to appear to be precautionary, so they take all this satellite data, which is exaggerated, and they haven't got the real guts to study an area very closely and come up with exactly how this area is behaving.
Yeah. Russell, go ahead. The doctor's listening.
Yeah, thanks for taking the call. Just a very quick one about the makeup of the air that we're breathing right now. Obviously, oxygen, nitrogen, and percentage-wise, 78 and 21 roughly, and then that's 1% of other gases. And of that, you've mentioned that carbon dioxide was 0.04%.
That's right.
At what stage and who, if we're producing more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, does that figure change?
Well, I don't think it hurts you at all. I think in the American submarines, they're quite happy to have 2,000 parts per million CO2. At the moment, we've got 400. So, the extra CO2 is helping crops around the world, and we've got a lot more people to feed. So I don't see a problem.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is when they say we're producing more carbon dioxide, and that's what's, creating the warmth and that sort of thing, at some stage it's obviously got to go up, doesn't it, for the whole planet?
CO2 is going up at the moment about 3 parts per million per year. That's correct. And part of that increase is humans and industry, but another part of that increase is simply because it's a bit warmer, there's a little bit more oxidization of organic material, and that's causing some CO2 to increase. So it is increasing. So
at some stage down the track, any scientific text is going to say that percentage is now 0.08, whatever it is.
Oh, well, yeah, it probably won't be. Yeah, if it doubled, it would be 0.08, but I don't think it's going to get to that in a hurry. But you're correct. You are correct. It is increasing, Russell.
At some stage, they're going to have to increase that figure in scientific texts.
Oh, yes, absolutely. They keep changing it even now in scientific, and they express it in terms of parts per million. And so In 1850, they're talking about 280 parts per million. Today, it's 400. So they keep changing it all the time. There is a monitoring station in Hawaii that was set up by Keeling in the 50s. There's another monitoring station in the Antarctic, and these stations all around the world give you the constant change in readings in CO2.
Yeah, that's all I need to know is just that at some stage it's obviously going to be well known that it's not 0.04% anymore. It is whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, Russell, thank you. Appreciate that. What do you make of this major heat wave that New South Wales experienced over the weekend, that other states have experienced either side of the weekend, and, articles today, statements made by politicians today linking it to climate change?
Oh, that's a political prophetic narrative we get every time there's a storm, every time there's a heat wave, every time there's some bleaching on a coral reef. We've got to live, as John Lovelock, who's the famous environmentalist who wrote the Gaia hypothesis, said, we've got to enjoy this warming while we've got it for the next couple of 100 years. And we've just got to live with it. So, and then we cannot look at the individual storms as meaning anything, because there are ups and downs in that anyhow. You've only got to look at some of the heat waves that happened last century in 1886 in Burke.
Yeah.
They had a week of about 48 degrees.
1896. Yeah.
1886.
86, was it? Yeah, right. So, surely if you don't have proper records for, say, a 500-year period, you really are guessing, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely. We can make some guesses with other tricky isotopes and stuff as to temperatures of the past, but we don't have that really, defined sensitivity, because we've got better records now. But yeah. I say one thing, the British Antarctic Division drilled a hole in West Antarctica in the ice some years ago. They got 300 metres of records. They could delineate things down to pretty well 1 year. The strongest warming year over the last 300 years was between 1748 and 1788.
1748?
Yeah, and that was before CO2 even went up. And people have got to realise the glacial retreat that we're seeing around the world, that started before CO2 went up. So the idea that CO2 is a puppet in all this, that's crazy.
Great to have you here. Can you stay a little bit longer?
I'm happy to stay.
You're in demand. I'm telling you, you are in demand, not only by me, but by our listeners and our emailers and our callers, and we'll get back to you and ask you questions of Dr. Howard Brady, Mirrors and Mazes, a guide through the climate change debate. 25 to 2, 25 to 1 in Queensland. 21 to 2, 21 to 1 in Queensland. Now, Dr. Howard Brady, you were just talking about something that I want to take a little bit further. And you were discussing this core that was taken in Antarctica, and that it proved, having been able to trace what was happening in terms of temperature almost by the year, that it was able to determine that the planet was warming prior to man-made CO2 coming into the air, right?
Oh, 100 years before.
100 years before. So could that have been the case because of changes in the sun at that time?
Well, we have a very regular pattern over the last 5,000 or 6,000 years of these warm periods, and each one lasts about 400, maybe even 600 years. We had the Minoan warm period, we had the Roman warm period, we had the medieval warm period. We're in another one now, and it looks in pattern, even in the whole profile, we're in a very similar situation as we have been in the past.
How many hundreds of years of warming currently?
This time, it depends where you... People debate as scientists when this warming started. Some of them won't start until the 1850s. Some will start at 1750s. I think it really started around 1750. So we've been in it nearly 300 years. We might have a couple of hundred years to go. The Russians think we could cool this century, but then after that we'll start warming again. And as a matter of fact, they've been probably the most ones on the ball in terms of looking at sunspots and sun cycles, and they were coming up even in the 1990s, how each sun cycle would start decreasing in sunspot number, and they were spot on. That's the Pulkovo Observatory
which
in
leads
Russia.
them to conclude that we are approaching a cooling cycle.
Yeah, but they think that'll be a snap. Like there was another cooling cycle between 1795 and 1820, and that's when Napoleon made the mistake of going into Russia. But they're talking about a cold snap. They're not talking about a long And then after that cold snap is over, the Russians think we'll warm again until this 400 or 500 year period's over.
Okay. Stephen, go ahead. Howard is listening.
People tend to forget that in the Carboniferous period, where all this coal comes from that we're pulling out of the ground, that was when bark first started to grow on trees, and the atmospheric oxygen level was 31% because carbon was being extracted by the tree out of the atmosphere.
Oh, well, in that period, yes and no, Steve. In that period, the carbon dioxide levels were pretty well around today, but there's an even more important point, and that in the Ordovician period, a little bit before that, we had an ice age when the CO2 levels were 10 times that of today. So how can CO2 be controlling things when we had an ice age 400 million years ago with carbon dioxide 10 times that of today?
Well, that's right. I kind of think we've only kept relatively accurate records for 150 years, and in the 4.5 billion years that came before that, a lot of other things happened on this planet. We're kind of guessing.
We are kind of guessing, Stephen, but we're getting a little bit of resolution in terms of some of these past ice age periods, and they're not related to CO2 levels. And CO2 levels can be high, and we have a full ice age where we get ice down into southern Europe, into Italy, and even a snowball Earth many billions of years ago. So, yeah, you're right. We don't know a lot, but certainly CO2 is not the puppet.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for your call. Jay, go right ahead.
G'day, Chris. How you going?
Hi, very well. Howard's listening.
Hi, Jay.
How are you, mate? I'm just the climate change this morning when the sun came up. You know, it went from global warming to climate change. But the last caller, I mean, didn't climate change kill the dinosaurs with the ice age?
No, well, we don't know what happened with the dinosaurs. One of the arguments is there was a severe climate change because a meteor hit the Earth, and that caused a lot of cloud and a cooling from that. It wasn't a normal ice age that hit the dinosaurs. A lot of funny things happened, and we're not quite too sure what happened.
Okay. But, you know, I think it's one of the biggest sort of hoaxes in modern history, this climate change scenario.
It's almost like that computer hoax around 2000.
Massive.
Good on you, Jay. Thank you very much. But why do we have the likes of Will Steffen, Tim Flannery, who are extremely concerned that we're not taking it seriously enough?
Look, I asked that question to myself, Chris, and I really find it hard to understand. Between 1975 and 2000, I could see people could argue that CO2 was going up and temperature was going up, and they seem to be running together. But
this is not causation; it's correlation.
Yeah, I know, but even so, that was. But then that when we've had a pause the last 15 years, I should have said, look, we should change our mind, because if we look back a bit further, between 1945 and 1975, the Earth cooled slightly, even though CO2 went up. And the CIA was warning the American president of an impending ice age. So I don't understand the Flannerys and Steffens of this world. Every time there's a storm, Will sort of says that's climate change, and it's like a cracked record. I don't understand them. I'm sorry.
All right, Frank, you've got a question. Go right ahead.
How's it going?
Well,
my theory, or at least I've heard this theory mentioned before, but not very much, and that the axis of the globe is on an angle. That axis rotates every 1,000 years. So as that rotates, it changes the position of countries, and therefore weather changes. At some parts at the bottom of South America, their tests have shown, or their records have shown, that it's slowly getting colder in that part of the world. Yet, yes, I guess some parts are getting hotter, but if that angle is changing, it's every 1,000 years, it's very hard to put those records.
Oh, look, Frank, you've got the right idea. There are changes, but not every 1,000 years. We've got a wobble in the axis of 2.5 degrees, and then we've got a rotation of that axis, but these changes are 20 to 40,000 years, and not every 1,000 years. So the idea is correct, but the idea that this is happening every 1,000 years, no, that's not correct.
Okay, Frank, I've got to run. John, hi there.
About the rising of the water, the oceans. We did an experiment with this years and years ago when I was at school, and the teacher said we had this big tub and put a block of ice in it in the morning, and by the afternoon the block of ice was gone and the water had not gone up one thou. So, like, even if the North Pole is floating on the ocean, It's absolutely floating. Even if that melted, it's not going to go up one skerrick.
Yeah, but John, you're right. If the pack ice melts in Antarctic or Arctic, no change in sea level. But if ice comes from the land, from Greenland into the ocean or from Antarctic, that will change sea level. And that's what all these guys are talking about. It's just that they're exaggerating the amount of ice that's coming.
Okay, let's talk about exaggeration for a second. I've long said that there are individuals around the world that drive this global warming scaremongering so much because at the end of the day, if politicians get worried about it because their constituents tell them they're worried, they'll hand out more grants and more money to people to create their own investigative industry. Am I right?
Well, absolutely. We've had these catastrophes for years. The worst one, or the one that started all, was James Hansen, who then became in charge of the NASA Goddard Centre for about 30 years.
Yeah.
And we get these guys in every country. We've got Professor Wadhams at Cambridge. We've had Tim Flannery out here in Stephen. Every country's got them, and they seem to scare the living daylights out of the politicians. And a politician can say, I've built this solar farm or wind farm, and look what I've done. But if I put $500 million dollars into research and nothing comes of it, I'm going to be castigated. So politicians haven't got the guts. We need to improve our technology, but the idea of installing all this infant technology now on a worldwide and industrial scale is absolutely stupid.
Okay, Colin on line 5, go right ahead.
Just a quick question. The massive push for renewables via windmills and solar panels and the demonising of coal as an energy source, is it warranted?
No, because we're putting in infant technology that has to be subsidised, and then the technology we're putting in, if the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, we still need the coal and the gas stations spinning and doing nothing. It's called a spinning reserve. That's costing us the same. So we're just wasting money.
Isn't it ridiculous? We've got so many windmills that when the wind doesn't blow, don't move. We've got so many solar panels that don't take advantage of the sun when the sun doesn't come out. And we've even got desal plants right around the country that do absolutely nothing because we've all got scared about global warming, Howard.
The politicians were scared by Tim Flannery and his mates. There's no other way around it. And it's a very sad thing that they didn't have the guts to say this is stupid. If they'd looked at Spain, they would have seen that Spain nearly bankrupted itself by going early down this route.
The same way as South Australia's doing right now.
Absolutely.
Isabel, Howard, you've got one question for Howard. Last question of the afternoon.
Hello.
Hi, Isabel.
Hi, Howard. I'd like to buy your book, but I've been looking everywhere and can't find it.
Oh, that's very kind of you. We didn't go through booksellers. We self-published. So if you just go to the website, mirrorandmazes.com.au, you can buy it on there either through PayPal, if you've got an account, or just through a normal credit card. And we'll dispatch it within 48 hours. No problem.
Okay.
Good on you, Isabel. Thank you. Mirrors and Mazes, it's called. Go to the website, mirrorsandmazes.com.au, a guide through the climate change debate. We will get you back, Howard Brady. Thank you very much for your time.
Chris, I'm so delighted to come here because all around Australia, the emails that I'm getting, people are just angry. They're angry about the billions spent on the desal plants and the problems in South Australia. They realise they are horrific because once Hazelwood is closed, that thing is going to reverberate into New South Wales, and we're going to have the same trouble.
Yeah, right around Australia. Thank you very much for that. 10 minutes to 2, 10 to 1 in Queensland. Chris Smith across Australia. Well, I've done something that I thought I'd end up doing eventually, is telling Howard to stay here, because one of the things we haven't canvassed with him is a statement put out by Jeremy Buckingham, the Greens MLC. He has said today there'll be climate migration, because he's found a statistic out of Moree, a place that I lived in, which shows that it's broken a record. They've had 51 days above 35 degrees Celsius. Now, I would have thought from my days in Moree, there would have been at least a month where the temperature was above 35 degrees. So it's not such a huge record to break. But I understand that his office has phoned us saying, I want to write a reply. I thought we'd try and get him on the line, Jeremy Buckingham, but I've kept Howard Brady here. What are your thoughts on what he's saying here? A climate migration, like as if there's a gigantic meteor about to hit.
I wonder what would have happened to Jeremy if he lived in Roman times when Hannibal crossed the Alps with 80,000 soldiers and elephants. couldn't do that today. It'd have to be a lot hotter. Jeremy would have panicked. It would have been, wouldn't it have been the end of the world?
That's right. Well, we had grapes growing in London
oh, no. They got as far as the Scottish border.
Scottish border, grapes growing.
And we had oak forests in southern Sweden.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid if Jeremy lived in the past, I mean, he would have died of worry.
What's your response to him saying, oh, it's broken a record, though, 51 days above 35 degrees?
Well, he's mixing up weather and climate change, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you're right. Thank you very much once again, Howard. There you go. Gee, I tell you what, we've got a stack of emails and a stack of callers. Thank you so much. Sorry to the ones I couldn't get to. Sorry about all of that, but that's how it goes. And what we might do, as I said to Howard Brady during that last commercial break, because of the response to what he's saying and because he seems to have a more responsible approach and a less emotional approach on the subject of climate change, I think he is a man we should get back into the studio again and again. Yes, there's warming. Yes, there's warming. As a matter of fact, the way the world has operated, we've had kind of 400 and 500 years cycles of warming and then 400 and 500 year cycles of cooling. And as the Russians have found only recently, and as Howard says, they've done some pretty good research on this, changes to sunspots in the sun have also seemed to have a little bit more to do with the way temperatures have risen as opposed to man-made CO2. So there you go.